The first thought of a parent that's hiring someone like me is that I'm just going to rush in there like Steven Seagal in a movie,
right,
beat everybody up and take their kid. It almost never works that way.
So you get a divorce and get custody of your children, but your spouse takes a trip overseas with them and doesn't plan to come back. What can you do? Depending on the country's relations with the U.S., you may not have much legal recourse. So that's when people call my guest today Jeff. We're only using his first name to protect his identity. He specializes in rescuing children abducted overseas by the non-custodial parent, a dangerous and difficult job. And Catherine MacWillie is back. She's a former LAPD officer that's founded Custody Calculations, a business helping people with family law issues. She has some advice on how you can protect your children from being taken out of the country illegally and how you can get help if they happen. Welcome back, Catherine. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Pleasure, Jeff. Catherine, we've talked a bit before about parents who in custody matters abduct their children in the U.S., but this is really taking it to another level, taking them out of the country.
It's a terrible problem, and for the parents that are facing it, you know, there's very little out there to help them.
And this is what, I mean, the State Department, I think, lists, I know, hundreds of cases where this has happened and maybe thousands.
Well, I actually did some research just on the internet last night trying to get some of the latest statistics. And for instance, Canada, which is a much smaller population than the U.S.,
sure,
says that it reports between 400 and 500 families a year dealing with this problem. But the problem is that those are only the families who report those actions criminally. Mm-hmm. A lot of people attempt to correct the problem through a civil court proceeding, family law in other countries. So we really don't have a good solid statistic on how many people this is affecting.
Well, Jeff, as I told you when we were talking earlier, your life sounds right out of a movie or your story. So you get a call, or how does this work?
It's usually a word of mouth referral because I don't advertise, obviously. This is the closest thing I've come to. And the typical call, unfortunately, goes something like this. The phone will ring and someone will say, I got your number from so-and-so, and I heard that you can help bring children back from overseas. And I say, yes, on occasion I can. And they say, well, my son and daughter, whatever the case, was taken by my ex-husband 2 years ago. I've spent every penny I have on lawyers. They haven't done anything for me. What can you do? And my answer is, if you've spent every penny you have, I can't do anything.
Okay. Because this is not cheap.
It is not cheap.
Not cheap.
It is the option of last resort for many reasons, and one of those reasons is it is very expensive to mount this kind of an operation. It's time consuming. And even though the people that work with me and myself take very little money, you'd be astounded at how little money we actually wind up taking off the top.
But just the logistics of
the travel, because you can't do anything in advance. And you know how travel fees are structured. If you walk into the airport and buy a ticket to go somewhere right then and there, that's the most expensive ticket you will ever buy.
Oh, sure.
And unfortunately, in the process of an operation, that's the only way you can buy tickets. You can't go to Expedia.com and buy them 30 days in advance because you don't know where you're going to be in 30 days. You don't know, you can never exactly predict the timing of your movements because there's so many variables. So it's a very expensive thing to do. So the only parents that it's available to are parents of means, parents of children who've been taken to certain countries, because there's no point in contacting someone like me if your child is in a Hague Convention signatory country like England or Germany or
Okay, so we should be clear. So for countries that have signed the Hague Convention, that there is legal recourse, like the European Union, most of the European countries, you can how does that work? There are court proceedings or?
Well, there's the issue of child abduction is at such a level that there's actually a treaty between the United States and many other countries in the world in which they say that children who have abducted from their country of origin will be retained and returned to the country. But there's still a process you have to go through, and it doesn't necessarily mean, again, that there's a successful action. But there are also some countries that you would be surprised that aren't part of it. For Japan, for instance, I met one parent whose young infant daughter was taken and to Japan, and they had been very unsuccessful in obtaining custody or a remedy of the situation, partly because it was not a Hague Convention.
And I think in general, so some of the Asian countries, Middle Eastern countries.
Correct.
But I guess, so Europe is probably one of the easier places to deal with.
Correct.
In a legal sense.
Europe is almost 100% signatory, the European countries.
So you don't do many rescues in Europe?
There's no reason for it.
Okay.
Asia, there's very few signatories. Africa, there's almost none. Latin America is about 50-50.
And you do these all over the world?
Do them all over the world, although it tends to be very Middle East centric.
Middle East.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason for that, again, is that, well, number one, they're not the signer of this convention, and also you said that the status of women in that country can play a part?
Right. If a Middle Eastern father takes children back to his home country, his wife has no status to even complain about it, really, and certainly no status in the courts. None of the Middle Eastern countries are signatories to the convention. So where does that leave a mother? It leaves her with no assets whatsoever. That's the time people start looking towards people like me for a solution.
And what is the process for when someone calls you above and beyond the money? You know, do you always say yeah? I mean, you know, what's your criteria for saying yes and no? How do you decide what's doable or what isn't, or what you will take on or won't, or?
Well, first off, I want to make absolutely sure that they've done everything they can do short of calling me, especially in terms of U.S. law.
Okay.
I want to make sure that they actually are the custodial parent, and I want to see some sort of
Have you ever had people trying it the other way, like the non-custodial parent trying to get the kids from the custodial or something? Or I mean,
a couple of times I've had calls like that, but I figured that out real quick and won't have anything to do with them.
I see.
But I want to make sure, I prefer that if a warrant has been issued for the non-custodial parent's arrest in the jurisdiction where they live.
And Catherine, you said that's one of the first steps that you recommend, is that the custodial parent gets an arrest warrant for the parent who's taken the kids out of the country.
What we'd really like to do is reduce the number of these cases to begin with by taking very good preventative steps. That's a lot of what my company is about, is taking preventative steps so that we don't need to get to the situation where Jeff and his group is involved. But yes, the first step is, when you are dealing with a situation like this, is that you go through the courts and you follow the law and you obtain a warrant for that person's arrest. And then once there is a legal action that's shown that every step has been taken and a warrant's been issued for that person's arrest, then you're in a much better legal standing, not only here in the United States, but in going forward with any action, either with a Hague Convention country or a non-Hague Convention country.
Well, I know the State Department on their website, or you quote actually something you gave me, that they don't recommend this. In fact, they kind of recommend not trying to abduct the children. But yet, and they give several reasons. They say that number one, something could go wrong, somebody could get killed in the process, that the kids, maybe they'll take them back again anyway, or you may have to be in hiding so they can't come and get the kids and all of this. But yet, when all is said and done, though, I believe you say, though, that, okay, that's true, but you may never see your kids again.
Right. It's very traumatic. And a lot of times when the children are returned to their parents, the children continue to suffer. They've been told the parent may not have loved them, that's why they didn't come after them. The children may suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome. They may feel that they're in fear that they could be re-abducted. Some of these children are very young. They're certainly not in a position to stand up and say no. They're lied to. And so even the return of the children after the process is completed and there's a successful extraction of children. It doesn't mean the problem goes away. There could be another attempt, or the family may have to change their appearance or change their location to make any additional attempts unsuccessful, or just trying to resume their life again can be difficult.
And so if you have the arrest warrant, I'm assuming you don't have legal problems in the U.S. from doing this, but you may face legal issues in the other countries that you're going into.
Almost certainly will face legal issues in the other countries.
So how does that work? I mean, how do you how do you handle that?
With great caution, lots of planning, and there's many different ways to approach a problem. The first thought of a parent that's hiring someone like me is that I'm just going to rush in there like Steven Seagal in a movie,
right,
beat everybody up and take their kid and, escape somehow. It almost never works that way. It has. I have done that.
Really?
But it's better to think the problem through and come up with a different solution.
Well, and I should say that you have a former U.S. military background,
right,
and you from like a special forces or special operations point of view. So for you, this is a mission. This is not just playing Rambo. I mean, you do have that background and training of rescues and.
Yes, and that's how I got involved in the first place. The first child I ever went after was the daughter of a friend of my former wife's, who knew my military and intelligence background and said, maybe you can help me. And then the next one, a reporter that I had known through military training called me and said, I know a woman who knows a woman, and that's how it all started. And I just said, yeah, I can probably help. And I had a friend from the Army that was doing it back in North Carolina. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And, it just sort of evolved that way. It isn't something that I sat down and wrote a business plan and said, this is a business I want to be in. It just happened. I found it very emotionally rewarding. There's nothing quite as wonderful as giving the child back to the mother.
Getting the kids back.
And so I kept doing it. I don't do it real often. I tend to take vacations from it for a couple of years at a time sometimes, because I know that every time you're flirting with the odds, that something
it's a big
really
deal.
bad
Things
is going to
could
go wrong.
And
the biggest threat, of course, is life in a really nasty Middle Eastern prison, which isn't something nice to contemplate, let's face it. So you've got to be very careful. And I have sophisticated my approach since the first couple of times I did it. The first couple of times I really was a little Rambo-esque. And now I've learned to really use trick and device and utilize local assets better and a lot of different things. You have to have a very large network of people that you know all over the world to even attempt something like this. You almost always have to have local help, almost always.
We'll be right back. And we are back today talking with Jeff, who rescues children who've been abducted during custody issues, and Catherine MacWillie from Custody Calculations. Well, Jeff, I wanted to get more into your approach to how you do this, but first, I guess we're generally talking that these are men who've taken the kids overseas from their ex-wives or wives. Is that what we're talking about?
Somewhere between 8 and 9 out of 10. But 1 or 2 out of every 10 is a father whose former wife has taken the kids.
Okay, so
it
does
does
work both
happen.
ways. And Catherine, did you say, is that changing? You think now that women may be doing it more than in the past, or?
Well, that's some of the interesting research that's been done lately, is that, we no longer have the presumption that it's always women that will obtain custody of children. That's changed as of the 80s, and we're looking at more shared parenting issues.
So in the past, they didn't have to take the kids because they got the kids anyway.
Right.
So,
So now we're seeing the dynamics of families changing. And some other research that I thought was interesting is that on the families that were reviewed for international abduction, the majority of women took the children after court orders were issued regarding custody, and the majority of men took the children for international abduction prior to court orders being issued. And if there's a presumption that someone has out there that they're safe after the divorce is final, or everything's done with, we should say that there is research that shows you still have a number of cases, 40% of the cases occur even after 2 years of which there's been custody orders in place, and even after 4 years there's still a 10% possibility, or there has been a 10% based on some of the research for international abduction. So time is not necessarily an indication of whether you're still at risk if you have somebody who's involved in dual citizenship, holds international passports, or has families in other countries.
We were talking beforehand, and you were saying something I found very interesting was that the motive. I mean, you would assume that it's just that the people want the kids, but actually you said that's generally not the case. That, well, different motives. Women want the kids, and men usually want revenge against the women. Is that true?
And we were discussing a little bit.
That's
of that.
what I've found. I haven't done research, but just from personal experience of the cases that I've worked, it's often a form of punishment to get even with the wife for some perceived, maybe the guy thinks the wife had an affair, or he's just mad at her for leaving him, or he thinks she took some of his money. I've dealt with all these issues, and her children are a really sensitive way that the husband can get even with her.
It's the most expedient manner in which to take action of harm and inflict emotional damage.
He knows it's going to just tear her up.
And indeed, although it's an even worse subject perhaps, but you see that these days with just even the killing of children.
Right. We do know, based on research done in dealing with child homicides, the majority of homicides dealing by a parent is usually inflicted upon the children in an effort to hurt the mother.
Well, you mentioned the international issues. Now, are these usually men or women who were from another country to begin with, and they go back to their home country and take the kids with them? Or is it sometimes just Americans running to Mexico? Or how does this work? How are they?
Well, a majority of the time, it's much easier for someone who has dual citizenship to return to their country of origin, or if they have family in another country, or they have passports, because it's easier for them to melt into the country, as opposed to if they're an American citizen and they try to flee to another country, they'll have a much more difficult time. They won't be as involved with the local population. They won't know the customs. They'll be more susceptible to being turned over to the law or having action taken against them. Whereas Jeff was saying, when they go and deal with the international abduction and go into these countries, they need the locals to help them extract the children. So majority of successful international abductions usually almost always involve people from another country.
Well, Jeff, I really want to hear how you do this, though. Now, I thought it was interesting you said beforehand you don't take guns.
No, never.
Don't take guns.
Never.
Because I would have assumed you were all armed but no guns. Why is that?
Because the goal is to spirit the children away and get them across a border where they can be repatriated back to the United States.
So you're not there to shoot anybody?
I would never allow anyone with me to carry a weapon, and I've gotten in big arguments with people that I've hired before because they were so anxious to.
Because sometimes the clients want you to, like you said, the grandfather wanted you to take the guns in or something. There you go.
Well, parents and grandparents tend to have a real sort of Hollywood movie based idea about what's going to happen, roaring into town on armed vehicles and,
Too many Hollywood movies.
Too many movies.
So how does it really work? How do you
How
really
it really works is
this?
you have to figure out a way first to remove the child from where they're being kept, which is usually the easiest part. The second, to remove the child from that country, which is usually a harder part because it almost always means illegally crossing a border. You have to do a lot of research, you have to do a lot of reconnaissance, you have to make a very good plan, and then you have to have people who can keep going after that plan falls completely apart, because it always does.
It never goes as you...
It never goes exactly as you expect. You have to have people that can think on their feet and get the job done.
And all the time also being worried about how traumatized the children
Oh,
will
yeah.
be when you take them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's one of the other things that you do that I thought was really spectacular, was realizing what steps need to be taken so the children are...
Well, you take the
Bring the
custodial parent with you,
mother
right?
as close to the point of reabduction as possible.
So they're right there pretty much with you.
Obviously, the best thing is for her to be just on the other side of the door, so that as soon as you leave the house where they're in, they're in the custody of their mother now.
So the kids don't think they're being kidnapped by some strange guys in the middle of the night or something.
You know, and if you can't get her that close, down the street, across town, whatever it is, each situation is going to be different. But the closer that she is, the less time those children are in the custody of strangers, the better off they're going to be. And I make that a big part of the planning process. And I have taken mothers right up in a car parked out in front, so that when the child's removed from the house, put them in the back seat of the car, right into their mother's lap.
Right there.
That's ideal. Can't always be done. I've also had times when I've had to hire locals to bring the child to the border. At that point, you bring the mother to the border. Well, the child may be, in one case that I can remember, 5 hours from in the custody of that country's police. It's traumatic. There was no other way it could be done in that case. So we brought the mother right to the border, but you still try to limit that as much as you can, and that's part of the planning process. Other than that, to have guns. If you're going to be stopped, you're going to be stopped by that country's police.
And you don't want to have a shootout with the police.
I'm not going to shoot it out with the police. I mean, really. You're better off surrendering and hoping that you can get a good lawyer.
And if you've got the kids, at least you can have the mother there and say
And if the mother's there, and say, I just came along to help her. She's getting her kids back, and I'm just along to help her, and that's all I'm doing here, and hope that, that you can work it out. But if you've shot a couple of local police officers, that's going to be a much more serious problem in the future. So we don't get involved in that at all. It is definitely not like the movies.
I'm sorry, we have to take a break, but we'll be right back. And we are back today talking about rescuing children who've been abducted overseas during custody cases. So what are the different kinds of abductions? You've broken it down into different categories.
Well, there's 3 basic categories that I've used in the past. Maybe there's more and I just haven't found them yet, but the 3, obviously the direct action, which is the one that most parents are thinking of, where you just go to where the children are, take custody away from the parent that's originally abducted them, and drive off into the night. It's the least used of the 3 methods, although I have used it before. Getting locals to assist, like I said, local police, local intelligence service, local criminals I've even used.
Wow.
Because some countries, somebody that looks like me can't move about freely without being watched, and you just can't send a team of Americans who don't know the language and stand out like a sore thumb, so you've got to get local help.
And you have your contacts all around the world?
Have contacts all around the world, but it's still dangerous because you never know when you give these people money if you're ever going to see them again. So you got to have all kinds of sophisticated checks and balances in place to make sure they perform as they say they're going to. And it's always nail-biting time from the time that they're paid till the time that they come back, hopefully with the child, or if they didn't just run off with the down payment and you're sitting there like a fool. So each method has downsides and as well as upsides. And then we have also managed to trick the husband into bringing the kid back, or to bringing the kid to a neutral area.
Can you tell us how that might work in general, or some, without giving away too much, maybe some scenarios?
It's hard to generalize, but there was an occasion where we made the husband's family think that the husband was being pursued by Colombian drug dealers.
That would do it?
And the family actually got a hold of him and talked him into coming back to the U.S., and as soon as he got back in the U.S., of course, we were waiting. That took a lot of sophisticated. I have had one of my operatives who went to a seminary as a kid pose as a priest and take confession from a member of the abducting parent's family. I have had a friend pose as a Colombian drug dealer. There's a lot of acting involved.
Well, we're running out of time, but has it ever just gone completely wrong?
Only once. I've got a success rate with one exception, and there was a lot of mitigating factors in the one that we couldn't pull off.
Catherine, very quickly, we're running out of time, but I think you say one thing you can do to prevent your kids from
Right,
being...
there's a couple of different things. When you're going through the family law process, you want to maintain control of the passports of the children, have those in a different location, a safety deposit box. You might want to request the courts to have the other party surrender their passports to the courts, and also you want to block the passports through the State Department. There's a special department within the passport agency's State Department that allows you as a parent to contact them and block the issuance of new passports or the taking of the children, and a bond. That's very important. You know, get a bond through the courts, the family law courts. It's one of the very few things that we do.
Thank you very much, Catherine MacWillie.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, as usual.
Jeff, thank you very much. Amazing story. It does sound like a movie, too, by the way. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time.